Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Tuesday evening, I'm Peter Sherman, and welcome to the Sherman Report. In a moment, I'll welcome the man who came from nowhere and spiraled right up the ranks of Toronto's mayoralty race last year. He did not win, but he made a significant mark. That's Anthony Furey, and he's seeking an open council seat in Don Valley West currently. I'm betting on him, and later we'll be joined by Stephen Thompson from Montreal. I editorialized the other day about how crazy things are getting for English Quebecers. Stephen spent 15 years as Director of Policy and Research with the Quebec Community Groups Network. He's a constitutional lawyer who has been part of the language law debates for a long time. This is something that should be of concern to all Canadians. We'll be right back with Anthony Furey in a moment.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
That's Anthony Furey you're looking at on the screen next to me, and I've known him for the past 7 years or so. Hello. He's a smart guy. He had a chance to demonstrate his thinking as the main editorialist for Post Media, but as a journalist, he's worked as a columnist, a senior editor, a talk show host. Got to watch out for those talk show hosts. And a media executive. Last year, he entered the Toronto mayoralty race as a guy at the back of the pack. But the more people saw of him, the higher he climbed in the polls. In the end, the veteran councillor and social activist Olivia Chow won the race. She's mayor of Toronto now, but Anthony developed quite a following. Not everyone to take anything for granted, though. He is out campaigning, canvassing in Don Valley West every day, and that's why he's sitting in his car. Now, my guess is he's going to win, but he's taking no chances. Welcome to the Sherman Report, Anthony Furey.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the new show. An honor to be one of the early guests.
Well, it's great to have you as an early guest, but I mean, you made that happen by deciding you're going out and doing this again. And I know that when you put your mind to something, it's go full out. And so you're probably out in the morning and the afternoon and early evening as well. I know when I was doing what you're doing, I don't think I could do it anymore. Back 15, 20 years ago, that's what I was doing, and that's what it took.
No, absolutely, and it's wild to say that I'm loving every minute of it, even though I'm sitting here in this mall parking lot with the rain. I don't know if you can hear it hitting the windshield, but it's now started raining, and I got all the junk food bags in the seat beside me because you're moving from canvas to canvas and trying to catch a meal in between. But ultimately, it's all a positive experience because in the mayor's race, it was very event-driven, debate-driven, media appearances. But doing this city council by-election for Don Valley West, it's about making those meaningful connections at the door. Basically walking up and down every street. I mean, I know you've done it more than I have, and knocking on people's door and saying, "Hey, here I am. I want to represent you, and I want to help make your lives better."
I recall you talking sense during that campaign last year. You knew that Toronto accounts for about 20% of Canadian GDP, but it always has money problems. And your old opponent, Olivia Chow, Mayor Chow, is now in that chair. How do we, as Torontonians, address the money issue? Because we seem to still be falling short despite a 13% tax increase.
Yeah, Peter, and you've really identified the main issue. Toronto as a major contributor to the GDP, Toronto as an economic engine. I mean, we obviously have other sectors. We've got the oil sands in Alberta, but the Toronto economy is itself such a big fighting force for the nation. So goes Toronto, so goes the nation. So I've been concerned that if our financial situation isn't good here, we can get a bit of a downward spiral. We can get capital flight. We can erode our tax base. And right now we have a situation where, yeah, we've had the highest tax increase since amalgamation. That was when all these different Toronto used to be like half a dozen little cities. Now it's one big city. And now we have this large tax increase. And when I campaign door to door, Peter, residents are saying, and particularly, wealthier ones say, look, can we afford this tax increase? Sure, we guess we can if we really have to, but we don't feel the money's being well spent. That's the thing that really irks people. Now, seniors on fixed incomes, lower income people, they cannot afford this high tax increase. But the bottom line is, is the money being well spent? If you had this record tax increase and then crime was suddenly dealt with, infrastructure was working again, transit was fixed. And we know these things don't happen with a snap of a finger, but we don't even feel like they're beginning to be fixed and that money's being put to good use. That's the problem. And yet, as you know, Peter, I think the whole nation knows that Toronto Council has been obsessed with renaming Dundas Street and renaming Yonge and Dundas Square because of something that happened 200 years ago that people are very much debating. They want to rename it Sankofa Square. It's going to cost $1 million just to rename the square. It'll cost $10 million to do all the renamings. It's not that much money for a multi-billion-dollar budget, but also, where are your priorities? Why are we spending so much energy, staff time, council debate time on this? And I want to get on council to say, come on, guys, wake up. Let's make our priorities more in line with those of regular taxpayers.
Well, if I looked like I got shocked there midway through what you were saying, it's because my phone rang, and there's nothing I can do but turn it off to avoid that happening. So
I thought I
I
just
apologize.
what I said. Okay, I guess not, but
No, it wasn't. It was nothing you said. As a matter of fact, it's music to my ears. I am a Toronto taxpayer. I have been hit hard, and I don't go out and work for a living anymore. But I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I'd like to see some motion, just as I'd like to see some motion with the Eglinton Crosstown, for example. We took a huge hit on municipal taxes, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, and that's thanks to Mayor Chow wanting to get on with fixing what's broken. That on its own sounds like a logical approach. As an individual, I've lost more than one tire to potholes, which remain, and the taxes are supposed to attend to those small things and the larger ones too. And in our city, economically, I've got to know if we're sound, and I don't feel that we are. Can we address our needs? I don't feel that we can. What say you?
well, I think that you're right, for starters, and more people are saying exactly what you're saying. And then those people are thinking, maybe I should get out of Dodge. So we have seniors who, if they don't necessarily have grandchildren that keep them there, if they have other communities they want to move to, they say, we're moving out to Toronto. We have people who are job creators who say, like one gentleman at the door just told me he employs hundreds of people, and he said he's currently looking at real estate in Miami. He'd like to take operations to Miami. So again, we have people who are leaving because we have this more socialist approach to crime, to social issues, and to financing that is such that we're pushing people out of the city. And Peter, I'm very concerned. I said this during the mayor's race. I still feel it now that there has in the past been the decline of great North American cities. It can happen again. We saw it with Detroit. We're seeing it with Seattle right now. I'm very worried we're going to see it with Toronto, and we're definitely going in the wrong direction. Thankfully, it's not happening fast. I never want to go on a podcast or a show and smack talk my beautiful city. But I think that we've got to work fast to stop that slow decline, because we can't wait until we're Detroit. We've got to act
Well,
now.
it's not about slagging the city. I mean, I'll give you a little example. Probably a month ago, I was sitting in a chair in a specialist's office. I'm talking about an MD who I had to see. He doesn't know me that well, but he asks me about certain aspects of my health. And then he just segues right into, you were a politician for a while, and you're a known talk show host. Should I be moving out of the city? Now, this is a guy who, I don't know what he makes, but it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Yeah, he's certainly well ensconced in a home he can afford. Why is he asking me this question? And the answer is because he feels that we're unstable. And I worry about that because I'm not going anywhere. I'm in my 70s, and I'll just go along and try to stay north of the 401. But there are a lot of people who do feel like you're talking about. And this was a guy who's below 50.
Yeah, yeah, and there's
We can't afford to have families go like that. Let me just move into crime. You mentioned it, and we only have limited time. We have a crime problem. Most big cities do, fair enough. We live among tent encampments right now. We undertake big projects like the Eglinton Crosstown that I mentioned before, and they take whatever seems like forever to complete, with huge lost productivity for those who have to drive in. So we've got it coming and going. That crosstown's been under construction for, I think it's now 11 years. So it's 11 years that businesses along that incredibly important thoroughfare have in some cases gone bankrupt, and in other cases have not done well. It took us through COVID and out of COVID. I mean, that's how long it's been around, and we still can't ride that train. How do we make these things move?
And it's alarming that we can point to examples in other cities where they make the move much easier. And Peter, I found that people who are international travelers for work, for leisure, they are the ones who are most aware that Toronto is underperforming because they see that a better is possible. And this transcends politics, Republican city, Democrat city, Europe, wherever. Like, they're doing things better in other jurisdictions. I think a lack of accountability is an issue. In Metrolinx, for instance, the CEO has repeatedly got six-figure raises almost every year, yet, to your point, can't deliver. And I'm not a vindictive person. I don't want to go out. I want to manage attrition to decrease staffing accounts, but I don't want to do mass firings. But this guy's got to get fired. And the same at City Hall when there's a massive boondoggle. We just had this vacant home tax thing. I won't relitigate it, but it was a total mess, waste of money, major headache. And I think not a single person got fired. Yet we know in the public sector, if you have one, it's that meme. You had one job. Well, you had one job. You massively failed to deliver it. So you should have no job no more. It's that simple. But we're not doing that. So there are no levers of accountability right now.
Anthony, we've been talking about Mayor Chow and what is now and what was prior to her and what we seek to get rid of. With her ensconced in her position for, what is it, another 2 years,
Yeah.
should we be looking at a win for you now as a launching pad for a really well organized and pointed campaign for mayor 2 years down the road?
Look, I'm really focused on the Don Valley West campaign right now, but I will say running for mayor was the experience of a lifetime, and I love putting forth this vision that is resonating with people, both during the mayor's race and now, in terms of turning the city around. And I do think that more and more people will be calling for the sort of vision that I articulated during the mayor's race in the months and years ahead. And I do think that Olivia Chow did not win so much because Toronto's voted for a socialist person, but because they'd heard of Olivia before. She's a nice person. She is. She's a very lovely person. I like her, as an individual. And now they're looking at the policies. People who voted for her have been supporting me in this campaign, saying, oh, we didn't know what we were going to get there. I mean, I kind of knew because I was following closely. So I think already the pendulum is swinging a bit. If people want to learn more about my Don Valley West campaign, the website's www.furey.ca, and I'm working hard, every day. It's just great to connect with people. You know how it is out there on the campaign hustings. It's a great experience.
It's actually fun. I mean, you occasionally get some dude at the door who wants to tell you two words that aren't happy birthday, but mostly it's a good experience. People do actually want to talk about how they feel about what they're getting for their taxes and so forth. I'm going to take the Chow answer as a qualified yes, but I don't expect to put you in that position. So I'll say this. Mayor Chow constantly talks about Torontonians coming together. It's almost a catchphrase of hers, and living well in our multicultural diversity, which is fine. It sounds like what I heard when I went to Woodstock 55 years ago. And by the way, I truly did go to Woodstock 55 years ago, but this is not Woodstock, it's Toronto, and you have a different message. She comes from the NDP, you are center right. The difference at the mayoralty level is what?
I would say the difference at the mayoralty level is whether or not you're someone who wants to stop this sort of downward spiral of worsening crime, lack of accountability, people fleeing the city, or whether you think that we need more open drug use, whether or not you think we need to add hundreds of kilometers of bike lanes to clog the streets, and whether we should just tax and spend. Unfortunately, Olivia Chow has been doing the latter. But I stand for those more reasonable, common sense policies that I think average families want to see more and more.
Okay, one last question. I know you have to run, and I've got another guest in the green room. So let me just say it's interesting to read the Financial Post suggesting your policies could be of great benefit to Toronto, and the Star, which is kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum, only wanting to focus on ancient columns that you wrote. How do you define yourself at this point?
Well, look, I'm pretty clear and unapologetic about the things I stand for, what I believe, and I'm proud to have been a journalist and a broadcaster for many years. And I like when people read all my past columns because I've been an advocate for common sense for the past 15 years. So let's talk about the stuff today, but by all means, let's talk about the stuff in the past too. I've written about all levels of government, and yeah, I've loved every minute of my broadcasting career, and I'm loving every minute of my aspiring politician career.
Well, I got to know you through my involvement in broadcasting and your involvement in broadcasting, and I've never thought anything less of Anthony Furey than that he is an honest broker. And I wish you nothing but good luck.
Right.
And thanks for appearing today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. You're the best.
I appreciate it, Anthony. So we'll thank Anthony, and we'll be back in a moment with an update on Quebec's tough language stance and the real situation for Anglo-Quebecers. Just hang in there.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Okay, I did an editorial last week that you probably heard if you're a regular, and I hope we're getting some regulars. Looks like we are. And it was about the tribulations of English Quebecers, whom to me seem like the whipping boy every time the French language comes into focus, which is often. Let's just call them what they are in the government's eyes: second-class citizens. I think this should concern all Canadians because it's really a constitutional issue. We all have the right to speak English or French, because those are Canada's two official languages. And there's room for Native people as well, of course. But it appears that the Quebec government of François Legault is not going to continue to nibble away at English language rights as his predecessors have historically done. He wants a big bite. Stephen Thompson is a Quebecer who spent 15 years as Director of Policy and Research for the Quebec Community Groups Network, an organization that advocates on behalf of the English-speaking Community of Quebec. Stephen Thompson, welcome to the Sherman Report.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be here.
Well, you've been right there through all of these governments, several governments, and their ideas on language in Quebec. And why do you suppose, I have to ask this, they're so fixated on English speakers? The old expression was, hey, it's a free country. But is it really a free country? I don't think it is.
Well, I think we just need to clarify one point that you made in your introduction. We live in a federation, and all Canadians are citizens simultaneously of the federal government and their respective provincial or territorial governments. And each of those levels of government have different playpens in which they operate. They have different areas of jurisdiction. As a Canadian citizen, when dealing with the government of Canada, where numbers warrant and other specified circumstances, you do have a right to communicate with the government of Canada and its institutions in Canada's official languages, English and French. In Quebec, the official language is French. And the project, which has been going on for hundreds of years and is a foundational principle of the Constitution Act of 1867, is to give Quebec the ability to protect and promote the French language and the French culture here in Quebec. So we can't transpose our expectations as Canadians as a right to speak English onto areas of provincial jurisdiction.
As a Quebecer myself, by birth, and 36 years of the first 36 years of my life living in Montreal, I have strong feelings about this, more than my fellow Ontarians do. In fact, what my fellow Ontarians generally say is, you know what, if they want to go, let them go. That's kind of the attitude in the rest of Canada. But I was looking at a post actually on Facebook today. I took the name of the company out because it doesn't matter. But it was an ad from this company that said, since you have a Quebec address, if you had a credit card associated with your account on file, that has been deleted. Until further notice, you will not be able to submit vehicles for sale or place bids on any auctions. Obviously, it's a buy-sell card thing. We know there is a strong and passionate community of automotive enthusiasts in Quebec, so please know that we share your disappointment with this situation. Unfortunately, we are not currently able to offer Quebec French language support, so under Quebec law, we are not able to offer our services to Quebec residents at this time. So I see you nodding along, which means you've seen that and you've seen other things like it, and you've been in a position where you've had to officially react to it, and now you're in a position where I'm just asking you a question. You're by trade a constitutional lawyer. How is it possible to pass language laws, and they've been doing it for nigh on 50 years now, in one province that say primacy to French and Anglos, you take the back seat if we let you talk at all?
So just a small point. I'm not a lawyer. I have a master's in constitutional law from Osgoode, but
Okay.
I'm not a practicing lawyer or a member of the bar. I'll
Okay,
just
but
go
you
back
know
to
more
my.
about
I'll
constitutional
just
law than
go,
most lawyers, so we'll
I'll
give you
just,
the
I'll
go
just
on
go
that.
back. I'll just go back to my original point. In areas of provincial jurisdiction, and this is long held, going back to the Ford case, where Quebec has the ability to legislate in areas of language to protect French. For a long time, I've lived in Quebec now for over 20 years, for example, there's some products that as a resident of Quebec, I can't buy from the Best Buy website because they're not available in Quebec because they don't come with French instructions or there's no French support for those products. So it is a fact of life living here that the things sold here and businesses operating in Quebec must be able to provide services in French.
I understand being able to provide services in French. What I don't understand is negation of your, I could almost say, humanity if you're not French. And look, the question, as you well know, dates back as long as separatism, which emerged when I was a kid. And I'm in my 70s. So a long time ago, it was the 50s. There have been, since then, referenda, elections, street demonstrations, constitutional discussions, even terrorism, a whole range of things where Quebec issues have been the subject. But we're still playing around with this nonsense. It's not a game. Why
It,
is it that we can't settle on the fact that Anglo-Quebecers are on any level worth everything that French Quebecers are? They just acknowledge that they live in a surrounding where being bilingual is a good idea, but it isn't essential. That's no different than French Ontarians. There are about 400,000 of them who deal with the same thing, and they seem to get by it without any screaming and yelling.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I think Franco-Ontarians have their own challenges, and I'll refer you back to a few years ago when Doug Ford cut the budget for the French University in Toronto, and there was concerted effort by the federal government to work to make sure that university got opened. I think that people also have to understand that there's a big difference between living in Quebec and interacting with my neighbors and my friends and my relatives, and just sort of getting along day to day. There's a big difference between that and the political reality in Quebec. And the political reality in Quebec is that there's political mileage to be gained by suiting yourself in the armor of protecting and promoting French and the unique culture that we have here. And the only way that Quebec can affect that protection is naturally going to catch and affect English-speaking Quebecers. There's no question about it. I'd even extend that idea wider, that English-speaking Quebec is unique because it's sort of, you remember Trudeau Sr.'s comment about the mouse next to the elephant. English-speaking Quebec sits between the Canada-Quebec relationship, and we are in the middle. There's 1.3 million English-speaking Quebecers. We are the largest linguistic minority in the country. I think if we were a province, we'd be the fourth largest province. There are a lot of us, but the way Canada is structured, that relationship between Ottawa and Quebec is so important. It overrides everything else. Your final point, why are we still talking about this? The final point, why are we still talking about this? It's because the conflict has never been resolved. So remember Quebec's demands back at Meach, which, by the way, they may have already obtained slowly over the years, because the Quebec government, I feel, is playing chess and the government in Ottawa is playing checkers. And I think Quebec has just about achieved its Meach demands by other means. But those issues back, you'll remember, with the repatriation of the Constitution 1982 and the two national referendums, there were conflicts between Quebec and the rest of Canada that weren't resolved. We're still seeing the movement of that resolution. I think that's what we're experiencing.
Well, it doesn't seem to be quite as bad as what I'm hasn't it has never been quite as bad as what I'm seeing now or hearing now. I still have plenty of friends and contacts in Montreal. I was just there last month for a week and talked to a lot of people, and I speak on the phone regularly with friends. And what they're telling me, and you can fill out this story, is they ran something up the flagpole to see who'd salute, and it was to the effect that if you were English, you would have to get used to getting your health services delivered en français, in French. That means you could technically go, let's say, to the Glen Hospital, the big hospital in the middle of Montreal, or the Jewish General Hospital, and there's a name for you. And you could be treated by an English doctor, aided by an English nurse, aided by an English technician, and you as patient are English. But if this came into being, all those four people would have to be conversing in French, where who knows whether or not the message would get across. And health is something you can't afford to mess around with. Now, here, there's been an intervention by the commissioner of the French language, who says, no, we're not going to go that far. But I haven't seen anything from the health ministry saying that they aren't. When I hear that from my friends, they say, I'm going to be joining you in Toronto pretty soon because they're going to cause another mass exodus.
Yes, what happened was, your listeners may have remembered that Quebec updated the Charter of the French language in June of 2022. And that the Charter of the French language and the Act on la Cité now stand at the top of Quebec's legal order. So every other act, every other Quebec act is now subject to the Charter of the French language. And the Charter of the French language purports to carve out the right of English speakers to receive health and social services in English, seems to protect that. But it's a very complicated act. Other parts of the act require the administration to speak in French. So there is some confusion. What appeared to have happened is this summer, a group of bureaucrats in the Ministry of Health put out a 31-page document providing direction to workers in the Quebec health system, telling them when they could exceptionally use English in the provision of services. This caused quite a furor, as you can imagine, and there was significant pushback from English-speaking Quebec. There seemed to be some confusion amongst the ministers in the Quebec government. I personally question whether or not this document was seen by the ministers before it was released to the public. And the Quebec seems to have backtracked on that document, and we're now waiting for a new direction. But what you're seeing here is the implementation of the new Charter of the French language and its effect in provincial institutions like healthcare facilities. But to be clear, there are designated institutions in Quebec that, under the Quebec Health Act and the Charter of the French language, should be able to provide services in English.
Well, all of that stuff put together, and I hear what you're saying, if I were still living in Quebec, would make me mighty pissed off. And as a Canadian, it makes me the same way. I've got limited time left, so I got time for one more question, and I've got to ask this. Could it be that Premier François Legault and his government are toughening things up and turning the screws on the Anglophones, number one, because they don't get any support from English Montreal. They just don't get even a seat out of it. And the Parti Québécois, as well as the Liberals, are building. Word is the PQ is becoming a potential force to be reckoned with at election time, and that's next year. So could this be what it is? And I might even add to it, if they were elected, could the PQ begin the separation nonsense all over again?
I don't think so. I don't think there's an appetite for it amongst Quebecers under the age of 35. I think that's gone now. I also have heard from people older than I am, Anglos here, that we were treated better under the PQ than we were under the CAQ. And to your point specifically, there is no question that the CAQ uses the English measures that negatively impact the English-speaking community, immigrants, people of different faiths and culture. They definitely weaponized that in an act for the la cité of the state. and the new charter of the French language to gain political points. There's no question about it.
Stephen Thompson, I really appreciate your time and the care with which you explain a fairly unhappy situation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. It was a pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you again sometime. That's our show for today, folks. If you tuned in halfway through, you can always go back to Facebook, YouTube, X, or LinkedIn to watch it in its entirety. If you prefer, you can get the audio-only portion by searching for the Sherman Report on any podcast platform. We are growing, but I want to move things forward, and maybe you can help. And here's how you can do it. Click share if you're on Facebook, or click repost if you're on X. And of course, tell your friends. We would appreciate that. See you tomorrow with the real story on monkeypox, or as it's now known, Mpox, right here on the Sherman Report. Good night.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to the Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.